Hello and welcome to the first annual Caribbean Works Film Festival. It is your host, Samira Hackshaw.
I'm Tony Smith.
And I'm Alexa Marvin.
And this film festival is about a time continuum of Caribbean culture and diasporic experiences. We'll be taking you on a time travel between films that connect the Caribbean diaspora and other things that are important to the Caribbean situation and ongoing lifestyle.
Yeah, we decided to organize this film in a chronological way, starting with the Atlantic slave trade in the Middle Passage, which was around the 1500s, and then building on that both thematically and chronologically to discuss the ways that the Caribbean diaspora has caused a lot of translation with and communication of Caribbean ideas and concepts, and it also mixed with the culture of the countries that they joined to. And so we picked some films that we felt well represented both of these concepts.
And from the Middle Passage, then we'll take a journey all the way into contemporary Caribbean culture, where we look at how the people of the Caribbean function today as a result of past experiences, historically, genetically. Yeah.
We even conclude with a film called Tomb, which actually joins the speculative, and it talks about the future. So we have the past, the present, and the future in this film festival. We begin the festival with Passage du Milieu, or The Middle Passage, which was a film directed by Guy Delarue. It is one of the most important, one of the most important, albeit tragic elements of the Caribbean diaspora is that of the journey of the Middle Passage, which, like I said, occurred in the 1500s. This was, of course, defined by the stage of the triangular trade route in which millions of Africans and Caribbean peoples were forcibly transported to the New World as part of the Atlantic slave trade. And this transport of various peoples resulted in cultural and religious ideas being taken to the New World as well. The documentary film, directed by Guy Delarue, was produced in 1999, but we agreed on placing it as the first film in our festival due to how this was the first recorded instance of a vast number of people migrating, albeit forcefully, from the Caribbean to other areas of the world. In this way, we felt that it built a good foundation on which the rest of the festival builds, both chronologically and thematically. The film mostly depicts slow motion views of the slaves in the sea, evoking very well both the physical and mental suffering that resulted due to this forceful migration. The film itself actually has no dialogue. The only verse heard is actually that of Makakoto's voiceover, which is in French. This results in a very interesting disconnection between the images of the film and the content that is spoken, which seemed to me like the director was trying to convey that the enslaved people did not have a voice. This film has been criticized for not being completely factual, but I enjoy the fictional aspects of it, and we felt that it still managed to communicate an incredibly significant element of the movement of Caribbean cultures and ideas.
What a wonderful way of putting that together, Alexa. Sounds amazing. I'm going to transition this into a musical film called Guava Island. On Guava Island, basically in the film by Jairo Moret, also a screenplay by Stephen Gulliver, or Gulliver, I think something like that. And then also the story by Donald Glover basically puts together a folklore of film and traditional and fictional, also kind of mixed in features of culture. So what happens is we have Donald Glover and of course infamous, both of them are two, Donald Glover and Rihanna in this film coming together as a relationship. The bigger story, or it's deeply rooted more so into the fact that we have this big gang member called Red who's controlling the island's productivity. And so basically what Donald Glover is trying to do is put together a festival. And so what this festival is going to do is stop work on that day. So here we have two characters that are going at each other, and they end up kidnapping Donald Glover in the movie because Red wants the productivity to keep on going, which is also going to relate to like the capitalism that goes on after the slaves are captured and how they force them into the different ways of laborious stress, I should say, and also capitalism, like we said. So that's what that film's about. And it brings together a really important conversation about folklore and how at the end, you have to see it. I don't want to give you the spoilers. So go ahead and check that out. It's a great film to put together their concept of folklore and also tradition, because at the end, it's a beautiful carnival, and you'll see.
Thank you, Samara. That was amazing. The next film that we decided to include chronologically, of course, was Forward Home, The Power of the Caribbean Diaspora. This documentary was something that we felt was incredibly relevant to the theme of the way in which Caribbean cultural ideas and concepts have transcended through time. It is interesting, though, because the film incorporates more of the economic repercussions of the diaspora, which the film Samira was talking about previously also communicates as well. Forward Home was directed by Lisa Wickham, and she explores the way in which the Caribbean diaspora contributes to the region's economy through a term called diasporic tourism. Diasporic tourism, it's a tongue twister, refers to the travel of people in diaspora to their ancestral homelands in search of their roots or to feel connected to their heritage. Lisa Wickham herself is Trinidadian, and the documentary is based on academic research conducted by Dr. Keith Nurse, who also assisted in the film's production. Dr. Nurse worked with a variety of diasporic Caribbean communities, such as Jamaicans in London, Dominicans in New York, the Guyanese community in Toronto, and the Surinamese in Amsterdam. His investigation aimed to uncover the importance of diasporic tourism to the economies and overall development of the Caribbean countries they came from. In this way, the film combines academia with a portrayal of different Caribbean cultures, landscapes, and people. I personally liked that the film highlights some important results of this diasporic tourism, such as the fact that the Caribbean diasporic communities tend to centralize themselves in large global cities, effectively mixing with and adding to the culture of the country to which they migrated. Additionally, it also points out that the smaller sizes of the economies and populations of the home countries in the Caribbean determine the relevance of the participation of the diasporic communities in national economies. The film allows the viewer to gain a clear idea of the gravity of the phenomena of diasporic tourism and how it strengthens the national economies either through the boost of the traveling, tourism, telecommunication industries, or through the more simple dynamics of finances sent by immigrants to their families back home. The film is mostly comprised of interviews which include reflections and testimonies on the experience of migration and the identity that immigrants were maintained to their homeland. Among the various things shared in these interviews are diasporic stories, aspirations, and dreams. Another beautiful aspect of this film that I personally really liked is that it represents Caribbean immigrants as people with power over their own lives and people who positively contribute to the economies and the societies that they join, instead of kind of in contrast to that perception of immigrants being hindrances on the social and economic context of the countries to which they immigrate. And I think that's all I had on that film, unless you guys have anything to add.
No, I think that was a very great explanation of the movie, and that is a perfect segue to our next film, which is called They Are We. It really ties into Forward Home and also the first film in regard to the Middle Passage, because it follows it follows like African diaspora in the Caribbean. So They Are We is a documentary film by the directors Dr. Emma Christopher. She's studied at the University of Sydney, and she studied mainly modern and also historical slavery, and she's also a huge anti-slavery advocate. The documentary film follows a group in Cuba called the Gangay Langoa people who live in like kind of the middle of the country, and it relates back to Forward Home because it kind of showcases how these communities tend to like group together and how they try to maintain their identity despite being surrounded by culturally like different people. It really gives way to like show the genetic legacy of the African diaspora like via the Middle Passage and transatlantic slave trade. So the film starts off where Dr. Emma Christopher, she does a lot of traveling, and she took a video of the Ganga Langoa people of Cuba, and she took a video of them dancing and like singing on a festival that they do every December, I believe December 17th. And she went back to Africa with the goal of trying to find their exact like national origin, which is a feat that many people deem to be impossible in today's day and age. But given things like DNA sequencing and DNA technology, it makes it possible to kind of like trace those like African roots. So once in Africa, Dr. Emma Christopher found her way in Sierra Leone, and she showed the video all throughout the region, and she wanted the help of locals to try to like show her like, where can I find these people? Where do they still do these things? And they were able to point her in the right direction to a certain city. So it was a certain kingdom called the Banta Kingdom. And she passed through Lower Banta first, and she was like, am I on the right track? And they were like, yeah. So she gets to the Upper Banta Kingdom, and the people are overjoyed to see this type of thing, and to see that people are still like, even across the ocean, they're able to still like take part in their African ancestry. So even though they're not connected to them like exactly physically, they're able to keep these things alive like on their own end. So the film kind of showcases not only the people of Sierra Leone doing their own things like in the Banta Kingdom, but also how the people in Cuba keep those things alive. And there are 4 participants from the Ganga Langoa people who get to go to Sierra Leone and experience their life as if they were never taken. And they get to kind of connect with those roots. And a powerful message that they all kind of had was that even though we were separated, we're still family. And something that someone said during the film was, one of the people from Cuba, he said, my body is in Cuba, but my soul is here. So it really shows like the power of family, and just like the power of togetherness, like what it can bring. So it's a more recent film, but I think it's a great way to showcase how people are trying to take back this identity, and how that'll be a positive thing for a future when you're surrounded by people who may not exactly look like you, or who don't really like have the same ideals as you or have the same beliefs.
Yeah, and that film's especially interesting, I feel like, because it connects the genetic with the cultural.
Yeah.
And that isn't something that our films have previously done, but it also does coincide with the world's understanding of genetics, which didn't come to fruition until the past century or so.
Yeah, very recently. And like, it's really surprising. And I feel like it's something that a lot of people do, like, with the modern technology, they do like 23andMe or Ancestry. So I think it's a nice way for everyone to kind of, not even just if you have like Caribbean ancestry or African ancestry, it's a nice way to connect with yourself and trying to discover the past, really.
Mm-hmm. And then segueing from that film, this film is a little bit of a contrast because it ties again into the more economic side of things, but it does have a very significant cultural impact that we'll discuss. The film is called Life and Debt, and it's a documentary directed by Stephanie Black. It again references the more, like I said, financial and economic aspects of the Caribbean diaspora, but it also connects to the theme of anti-globalization that is so relevant to these countries in the modern day. If you've seen the protests against free trade, against anti-globalization, this is actually incredibly relevant, especially in these Caribbean countries. The film itself focuses on the effect of the International Monetary Fund on the economy of Jamaica, and it shows how the result of free trade has destroyed Jamaican industry and agriculture, which has forced the country to no longer be a self-sufficient economic entity. This has caused a lot of problems for Jamaica with their exports and their ability to maintain finances. And it's resulted in Jamaica to be converted into basically a market for North American goods and a source of underpaid labor. More specifically, the film actually shows how, for example, powdered milk from America has effectively destroyed the Jamaican fresh milk industry. And also the Chiquita banana, something that is in pretty much every household nowadays. They show that the export of Chiquita bananas has actually resulted in there being little to no market for Jamaican bananas, who's a strong competitor, especially in Europe. During this, although this film does distance itself from the cultural transmission of Caribbean ideas, it does significantly relate to the trials that the people of Jamaica are facing in the modern day. But it also does provide some potential solutions to the problem, which again connects to the more speculative and shows how these cultural, economic, social interactions are still coming into play, and they're still going to affect the world for years to come.
Great.
I think our next film is Yardi.
Yeah, so this is an excellent film called Yachty that's going to bring together another, it's actually based on a book by, let me see his name, Victor Headley, and directed by Idris Elba. And it's what's it's representing is self-sufficiency when it transformed into lack of resources. Or just like Alexa was referring to, you have a situation which the export is low, there's no income and there's no labor. So you're going to run into basically situations where the island creates little criminal gangs to operate the city. And so what these gangs are going to do is come into the city, try to make more money and extract it through a different ways or means or drugs or something like that. And so what this is doing is creating, of course, the country's reliance more so on the gangs because they filter the money, and these political affirmed, Jamaican gangs turn into like criminal organizations, and they end up functioning and operating the country basically underneath the covers because the export is low. So what happens in this film is a young boy named D and his brother, excuse me, was trying to get the gangs to get along. And the importance of this representation of the two gangs is basically two sides, like capitalism versus the islands, like resources. One of the gang members was somebody who was actually giving to the community, and the other gang members was like filtering drugs just for their own capitalistic and high means. And it's a really great film to put together. Of course, it was a crime where they had happened. The brother ended up passing away. And D was, of course, like the predecessor of him, and he held on to this vengeance. One thing they talk about is the spiritual aspect of the cultural, in Jamaica and all these islands. And basically, the Duppy, which is his brother's spirit, was around him until he was able to like let go of the vengeance. So they also played into importance of religious aspect of how a spirit can linger if you don't let it, or if you don't feed it or give it offerings. So it brought together a lot of understanding about the cultural aspect and also like the political and also like the crime related to this whole segment of Jamaica and also the Caribbean diasporic experiences when it comes to lack of resources. So yes.
Thanks, Samira. So our next film is called The Last Colony. And so something that you'll notice as we take this journey through time, through these films, that, in the past, an issue was Caribbean relations with other countries, but that's something that they still deal with today. And I feel like that's very apparent in Life and Debt and also Yachty. So basically, The Last Colony it's also a documentary style film, and it's done based on interviews. It's directed by Juan Agustin Marquez, and it was filmed before I believe the last Puerto Rican plebiscite, which is where this island nation basically gets to decide, are we going to finally make that step and try to become a state? So it follows through the interviews. Everyone gets to kind of like have their say on, what they like historically, what is going to happen, what are the outcomes of each possible thing. So basically Puerto Rico is faced with like 4 different options. They can continue to like maintain their Commonwealth status. They can go for complete independence, statehood, which is something that is widely debated and that many are also kind of against. And then also just being like a sovereign like nation state. So a main issue that people in the Caribbean Sea is the lack of resources, and something that the people in like Puerto Rico mainly struggle with is how, do we get to be a territory of this massive like first world power, but we don't get to enjoy any of the same things that the citizens do. And it follows like historically like the struggles of like very recent generations, so something that like grandparents and parents have even experienced. And it really showcases like the struggles that people in the Caribbean feel to kind of like assimilate to these like Western cultures and kind of like veer away from their own indigenous roots or African roots. And get this new identity, which is really interesting because, it's their roots are something that they take a lot of pride in, but it's how do you maintain those with all of these like external pressures. And I feel like that's a great segue into like the next film, which is I Am Taino. And it's kind of different from other films that we've featured. So this one is a puppet film, and it was directed by, let me make sure that I have her name correct. So I Am Taino was directed by Alba Ine Garcia, and she is of Taino descent. And something that she directly stated in one of her interviews is that she feels it's her responsibility to represent her Taino brothers and sisters. The film also brings light to like U.S. Puerto Rican relations because it's after Hurricane Maria, which we all know was kind of handled a bit weird by the United States. So it follows Maribeli and her abuela Yaya, and she goes and she's kind of struggling in this like post disaster state, and she's like, how do we survive, where do we go from here? And abuela Yaya, she basically explains to Maribeli like, we come from very powerful ancestors who faced many different challenges, albeit if it was natural disasters or Spanish Inquisition, I guess. Spanish Inquisition, we've come from a long line of people who know how to survive, and that is something that we should take with us into the future, and it's something that you shouldn't be scared about, but, proud of to know that you come from these long line of people. You know how to survive, it's in your blood, and you know where to go from here. So it's also a story of just maintaining your roots, being proud of where you come from, even when we do live in a modern contemporary society where there's pressures from everyone, there's widespread influences. Did anyone have anything to add about that one?
I was just gonna say, I feel like with all these films so far, and of course, the next film we're going to talk about, Tomb, it's very futuristic and fictional, which isn't something that a lot of the other films represent. But I feel like this overall, most of the films, especially so far, have connected so many different, themes and things that like even economic, financial, political, social, natural disasters, all those problems carry with it cultural implications that are reflected in the media. So although many of these films are distinctive from each other, they really do overlap in communicating how the Caribbean diaspora and the transcendence of these cultures has really affected a lot of media and things through time.
Excellent way of incorporating that and bringing it together. Yes. So now we transition into Tomb, which is a film directed by the Trinobagonian. That's what it's called, because Trinidadian and Tobago put together, Nick Acton. So basically, what you're gonna have is a film that's gonna travel into a speculative fiction of deep space and time between, of course, the African Caribbean diaspora. This talks about Nelson Obatala. It uses names definitely of related to the Orisha and to the spiritual aspect of the world and realms. And so, what the commanders are doing is answering to a distress call in time and space. And in the film, too, they're like, okay, how are you going to be able to get the resources in distress beacon heard when we don't have any resources in Trinidad and Tobago? Basically, like they're like, what's going to happen when we basically got to solve the problem. And so he ends up, the commander, both of them, gets lost in space, and he actually goes through a wormhole and gets projected into the afterlife of what's going to happen to, basically, it's a sci-fi thriller of what will happen to the island if it continues in the way and if they're not receiving the resources in the way that they can. So it brings together an excellent diasporic and also a futuristic sense of the Caribbean, of how different structures and power dynamics play a part into the continuance of these islands. So it's an excellent film that they did a really great job on bringing together those themes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that we included a fictional film at the end. I feel like one of the things, just, to take a moment to do some self-criticism, because I feel like that's important with any sort of project. the only thing I think I would probably add to this festival is some more elements of like the religious context and that kind of cultural arena. I feel like that's the only subject that's been a bit overlooked. But other than that, I feel like we mostly touched on a variety of themes that really communicated how, you know, not only the life, the trials and tribulations of the Caribbean people, but also how that has affected the media in combination with it. So yeah.
I actually would like to add that I do believe that we touched on a little bit of the religious aspect. We just did it through a form of different artwork because the musical film or introduction in Guava Island definitely talks about or uses different language. Of course, it does have a This Is America rap song, but throughout the film, they incorporate different languages and different people. Even the island was from a specific island that he was on with different people that you would see, not normally on mainstream film or mainstream TV. And even with the usage of Mick acting using Obatala Yemayas, his daughter, and things of that nature, you can tell how a lot of these films are embedded into religious aspect, just using them as a representation of how humans understand it and how it is just a great way of interwoven a deeper story, a deeper way of expressing the folklore, expressing the fictional sci-fi thriller, expressing the life and death that happens within these islands. So you have to think about how they connect the spiritual realm to rising above to the occasion. So I think it plays into
Yeah, we definitely, you're right, we definitely did touch on that more than I was making it seem. You're right, it definitely is an underlining lining thing throughout, and I'm glad that we were able to touch on so many various concepts.
Yeah, I think that our films do like a really good job at kind of like supporting each other and like the overall theme that we were going for, because it really does show like the historical legacy, and then like we mentioned earlier, like the genetic legacy of everything that the Caribbean has like been through. And I think it leaves a lot of room for like self-reflection on the Caribbean itself. It leaves a lot of room for self-reflection of like the Caribbean people and their culture. And it's like, you know, how do these things prevail, and like how are they going to prevail in like a contemporary society, like I said, where there's a lot of outside pressures. So it really does make you want to ask questions like, you know, where do we go from here?
100%.
Yeah, and I think, does anyone else have anything to add?
That's it for me.
Thank you for coming to our roundtable talk. We did an excellent job at touching all those films. Please check out all these films. Our festival is July 9th to the 15th. So, and opening night is July 7th. We're doing it 2 days early. Yeah. Ladies, how you feeling?
Buy your ticket.
Yes, get your ticket.